The Rogers Dynasonic snare drum, one of the most revolutionary drums ever developed. First released by Rogers in 1961 and was unveiled in the 62R catalog. The more difficult to find versions of this drum, like the woodshell and the Gretsch shell chrome over brass drum, today bring the big bucks. But there is some controversy and disagreement on the inception and development of this drum. There's the version of the story that Ben Strauss tells, where Buddy Rich came to him wanting a more sensitive drum, so genius engineer Joe Thompson went to work and developed this revolutionary idea.
I'm getting into why we came up with Dyna Sonic. When Buddy first started with us, he was playing on a power tone snare drum. And in discussing the product, he asked me, Ben, is it possible to make a drum that will respond easily when you're playing triple pianissimo or triple forte? And I said, I really don't know, but I'll go back and we'll talk to the engineer and we'll see what we can come up with. I said, what's the problem? Buddy says, well, most drums respond fairly well when you play soft or mezzo forte. But when you lay into it, he says, they seem to fall apart. I think you know what I'm talking about. I said, yes, let's see what we can do. So I sat down with Joe Thompson and I said, explained to him what Buddy had asked me. And he said, well, let's look into something. Let's see what it was. And we sat down, and Joe did most of it, but I was in the little corner of the picture. What makes a drum sound? How does a drum respond to the player? Now, no one had ever come up with that kind of a question. Give them a drum, and we'd either tighten it or tune it, whatever you want to call it, and that's it. I'm making light of it, but I'm sure Billy Gladstone wasn't that class, you know. But I used to notice that so many drummers would just take a drum key and go around it and hit it, and they were satisfied. We didn't feel that way. We felt that the drum was a musical instrument, and it should have some kind of a sound. Not just a rhythm maker, but it ought to have some sound. And that's what we strive for. We changed the approach to the snare beds. I always remember that snare beds always were rather deep. And some fellows said, well, they have to be, otherwise the snares won't make contact with the head. So what you're doing is pulling the snares into the head, obviously. Mm-hmm. So then my question used to be, well, what happens to the snare head when you do that? And they said, what do you mean? I said, you realize that when you're putting pressure on the snare head, before I tell you what happens to your batter head when you put an internal tone control into it? You deaden it, don't you? I says, yeah. I says, then when you pull the snares into the snare head, you're deadening that too. Is that what you want to do? So they'd say, well, what am I going to do? That's the way drums are made today. I said, well, we're going to see if we can change that. And we did. That's really the story behind the Dynasonic.
And then there's the Ellis Tolan version, where after having a bitter falling out with Bill Ludwig, Mr. Tollin saw not only a great business opportunity, but a chance to get back at Mr. Ludwig when Henry Grossman came asking for help with his new drum company that he had recently purchased.
Right.
Everybody sold Slingerland drums because Gene Krupa played Slingerland drums, and that's what the kids went for.
Yeah, right.
And we were selling Ludwig drums. We had gotten an exclusive on it, and I don't know whether it was within the first year. Mm-hmm. We used to fix the drums up. They were so bad, I used to have to mechanically correct them and do this. And one of my students came in and asked me to fix his snare drum, and I started to fix it, and I looked at him. I said, gee, you didn't buy this drum from me. Where did you get it? He said, 8th Street Music. Eddie Hirschman and his brother used to run the place. Anyhow, when I found out that they were buying it from 8th Street Music, and they were very close friends of mine also, I called them up and I said, where did you get the Ludwig drums? And they said, from William F. Ludwig, of course. So I called up Bill Ludwig, and I said to him, Bill, I said, I'm supposed to have an exclusive in Philadelphia, and you're selling drums 6 blocks away from me. So what are you doing? He says, we need more exposure. I said, well, there's only one thing I can suggest. He says, what's that? I said, take your drum company and shove it. And later on, a guy named Henry Grossman walked in the store, but that's later on. And at that time, I was still burning from the Ludwig thing. And Henry Grossman said, gee, Ellis, he said, we heard all about you. He says, I'd like to talk to you. He showed me some holders, Swivel-matic drum holders. How are they? What do you think they would do on the market? I said, gee, they're great. They got to sell. He said, I also bought a drum company. I said, what's the name of the drum company? He said, Rogers.
Right.
I said, gee, Rogers is, to me, a toy drum company. I said, I can't handle Rogers drums. He said, well, the reason we came to see you is we want to know how can we take this drum company and make it the way you would like it.
Right.
And I said to myself, here's my chance to fix Bill Ludwig. That's all I thought of. I didn't think like a businessman.
Right.
I thought like a drummer, right?
Right.
I said, I'll tell you what I'll do. I said, I'll show you how to build the drums and to make the best drums in the world. I'll get you Buddy Rich to play them. I'll get you Louis Bellson. I'll show you how to do drum clinics, because we had been doing drum clinics in the store, not in the store, in the studio in 1947. In 1948, we started doing drum clinics.
Right.
I said, I'll even show you how to build the best snare drum in the world. So I designed a Dyna Sonic snare drum.
Okay.
Right? I never asked for royalties. My head wasn't in that particular.
Right.
All I wanted was for Rogers to now have the best drums on the market, and for them to give me an exclusive.
Right.
Which they did, and Henry Grossman was a man of his word. He
Right.
stuck by it all his life until he sold the drum company.
Most of us know the famous story of the snowstorm, but if you don't, to briefly summarize, Joe Thompson and Ben Strauss visited Ellis Tolan's home in Philadelphia in hopes of sharing some ideas about this new snare drum they were developing. When one of them, some say Strauss, went to leave to go buy some cigarettes, he discovered outside was a blizzard. That group stayed snowed in at the Tollin residence for at least 24 hours, and when they came up from the basement, the design for the Dynasonic was complete. When speaking to Ellis Tolan's son Bobby, he remembered that snowed-in visit well. I think he said he was 10 at the time. He remembered going downstairs when the men came up to have something to eat and seeing ashtrays full of cigarettes and drawings all over the table. Regardless of this tale having two sides, the truth is in there somewhere. If this topic interests you in the least, join us at this year's Shields Classic Drum Show and Homecoming in Covington, Ohio on April 27th, 2024, where we plan to possibly have a panel discussion on this topic and attempt to hash it out and find something that might resemble the truth. Details on that show to follow. Word is, this year's show may be held in a very, very special place. Stay tuned to find out where that might be.